Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report here on NewsX World. Let's dive into the top headlines of the hour. Iran says it seeks a diplomatic solution on its nuclear program, but warns it will respond to any US military strike as a new round of talks is set for Geneva. Tehran calls even a limited act of aggression after President Donald Trump says he is considering military options. President Donald Trump condemns the US Supreme Court after it strikes down his sweeping tariffs, saying he will turn to other trade powers and licensing authorities. In a social media post, he claims the court has accidentally and unwittingly given him greater strength and vows to use alternative tariff tools more forcefully. The killing of Jalisco New Generation cartel leader El Mencho triggers a wave of violence across Mexico, plunging some areas into chaos. The 59-year-old fugitive headed one of the country's fastest-growing criminal networks, trafficking fentanyl, methamphetamine and cocaine into the US. American forces leading the anti-jihadist coalition are set to complete their withdrawal from Syria within a month, according to multiple sources. The United States, which deployed troops to back Kurdish-led forces against ISIS, have already begun leaving a major base in the northeastern region. French President Emmanuel Macron calls on the European Union to step up pressure on Russia and adopt a new sanctions package over the war in Ukraine. The proposed 20th round of EU sanctions has been blocked by Hungary, with talks set to continue in the coming days. Ukraine will need an estimated $588 billion to rebuild after 4 years of Russia's war. According to an assessment by the World Bank, the figure is nearly 3 times the country's annual economic output, underscoring the scale of damage. Reform UK unveils what it calls radical plans to tackle immigration, promising a new agency to deport thousands of illegal migrants and to withdraw from human rights treaties if it wins power. The party, led by Nigel Farage, is currently leading in opinion polls ahead of an election due by August 2029. The Netherlands swears in 38-year-old Rob Jetten as the country's youngest and first openly gay Prime Minister. Jetten takes power after a narrow October election victory over Geert Wilder's far-right Freedom Party. We start this hour with some breaking news, and at least 15 people have died after a military helicopter crashed in the Arequipa region of Peru. The Peruvian Air Force says the Mi-17 helicopter lost radio contact on Sunday afternoon. The wreckage was later located and rescue teams confirmed there was no survivors. In a statement, the Air Force said the victims include 4 crew members and 11 passengers who were on board at the time of the crash. Authorities are now investigating the cause of the incident. We turn now to the United States. US President Donald Trump has warned that countries attempting to quote-unquote play games after a key US Supreme Court tariff ruling will face much higher tariffs. The court ruled that tariffs he imposed last year under a national emergency law were illegal. The decision has renewed uncertainty among trading partners over signed and pending trade deals with the United States. Posting on Truth Social, Trump called the ruling ridiculous and said that nations have ripped off the US for years, even decades, and they would figure tougher penalties than those recently agreed. He ended the post with a blunt message: buyer beware. Joining us now to discuss the ongoing situation coming out of the United States is Ross Feingold, a political analyst. He joins us live from Taipei in Taiwan. Ross, thank you so much for joining us here on the broadcast. The United States, Donald Trump in particular, has, of course, signaled his dissatisfaction with the Supreme Court ruling on Truth Social, using aggravated language. But first of all, what are the questions that we still need to know when it comes of the future of these tariffs and the economic implications surrounding them?
We know since President Trump came back into office a little over a year ago that tariffs and changing the trade relationship that the U.S. has with major trading partners, especially those countries that had significant surplus with the United States, was going to be an important part of his foreign and economic policies. That will not change in the aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling. So we see that within hours, President Trump utilized other available legal authority to adjust tariffs, and he'll continue to look for those legal authorities. This has been discussed before the Supreme Court decision, as well as in the days afterwards, what those various authorities are. They do, in many cases, require the government to conduct investigations and issue findings and give targeted companies the chance to respond, and various steps that could delay that process. But the key point here is President Trump is definitely not going to give up on tariffs. Where there is legal authority to raise tariffs, he'll continue to do so. And then also, it bears mentioning once again that where countries have negotiated an agreement with President Trump, with the United States government, President Trump is going to expect those countries to adhere to those agreements and not to propose to renegotiate them.
What about how he's reacted in terms of imposing initially a 10% and now a 15% levy? What's your analysis of that?
Clearly, he's very angry at the Supreme Court justices, and specifically the conservative justices that voted against him. He's not going to forget this. He's made that abundantly clear. So initially he said 10%. He thought about it some more and then raised it up to 15%. I mean, I think that shows how angry he was at the Supreme Court decision. But it's also another form of leverage to reach deals with those countries that haven't reached a deal yet with his administration, or to remind those countries that have reached a deal, but maybe the details haven't been finalized, which is that's just the reality of some of the deals. They were frameworks with details yet to be negotiated. But again, I think the point here is for those countries that did reach a deal with President Trump, this is just another tool to remind them that either those deals need to be finalized, or where they've been finalized, they need to be implemented.
And Ross, the balance of powers in the United States has been much under debate when it comes to the Donald Trump presidency. But what does this say about the power of the judicial branch and the executive branch during Trump's 2.0 presidency?
And we should also throw into that question the legislative branch, because we do have three co-equal branches of government in the United States. Look, President Trump has clearly shown a willingness to test what the strengths of executive authority are. And if people disagree, they have to litigate. So he has all the advantages of the federal government and the army of lawyers across the federal government, including in the Justice Department, of course. So I don't think he's going to give up on that approach. So whether it's trade and tariffs or environmental regulations or the vast public policy areas where the White House and the president makes decisions, I don't think he's going to back down. He's going to continue to robustly use executive authority and challenge people who disagree to litigate, which is a very costly and time-consuming process. And just because of this one decision doesn't mean that the next time the administration will lose in the courts. They might very well win. Keeping in mind that between his first term and 1 year into his second term, President Trump has literally nominated or had confirmed hundreds and hundreds of judges throughout the United States federal courts.
Ross Feingold, Do stay with us as we turn over to our next story. But first we head to Europe, where the European Parliament has decided to delay its vote on the EU-US trade deal, citing the need for clarity on recent developments affecting transatlantic trade. The postponement follows US President Donald Trump's announcement of new 15% tariffs introduced after a ruling by the US Supreme Court, which has created uncertainty for European exporters. European Trade Commissioner Markos Šefčovič will join a meeting of G7 trade ministers later today to discuss the implications of the new US measures. The gathering is expected to include US counterparts and other G7 members to address the trade tensions and explore ways to maintain predictability in transatlantic commerce. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the European Commission said that the EU executive seeks a return to stability and predictability in the trade relationship with the US. Let's take a listen into the statements.
Full clarity on what these new developments mean for the EU-US trade relationship is the absolute minimum that is required in order for us as the EU to make a clear-eyed assessment and decide on next steps. And so, as you will have seen in our statement that we put out yesterday, we are requesting full clarity. There is engagement ongoing with the US, but more is required for us to understand the full picture here. Now we simply request clarity from the US so that we can figure out what happens next. It's not more complicated than that.
Mark Sutherland joins us now. He's a geopolitical commentator. He joins us live from London. Mark, the European Union has said that it will not accept further tariffs from the United States, and it says a deal is a deal. What do you make of this muddy situation post-Supreme Court ruling striking down Donald Trump's tariffs?
Thomas, good to be with you again. Rather interesting when that Freudian slip, America, EU, etc., and what's really happening, because the EU wishes to be a United States equivalent, but without the Constitution of America, which is another subject. And the reason why I say that is because it's a power play within, in my humble opinion, within the people of the ruling elites within the EU. Let's remind ourselves there's 26 commissioners that decide policy. There is the supposed European Parliament. You can't put any policy forward. You're there to ratify or to rant against it. In regard to what the Supreme Court has then given their edict, and I agree with Ross. I think President Trump will carry on. They will appeal this. They will get round this. As you and I have talked about, people have observed since the beginning of the Trump presidency, we see it's a weaponization of lawfare. There's so much to then work through. We have then, as various things unfold, to me, there's a familiarity in regard to what happened under the first Trump administration. So there is so much to then play out and what they will then come against, but I believe that they will plough on. And of course, within the European mindset of this of liberalism, they do not like the fact that Trump has turned around and said, well, we're pulling out of the WHO. No, I'm not financing this anymore. And frankly, if the UN falls apart, so be it. The whole story of the border peace is another discussion. They will carry on. They have been rattling the EU cage, as we know, in regard to the military spending that European countries have not done, and what they need to do, and then the whole relationship with NATO. All of this is intertwined, and to me, it's the EU, it's their opportunity in their minds to kick back. Thomas.
Yes, Mark, do stay with us as we now have some breaking news coming in from West Asia. We have a statement coming out of Iran, where its deputy foreign minister has warned that any military strike against the country could trigger a wider regional escalation amid rising tensions with the US. The warning comes after thousands of Iranians reportedly received anonymous text messages on Monday, citing US President Donald Trump as a man of action and warning of possible American military moves. The texts coincide with US deployments of military assets in the Middle East and reports that Trump is considering a limited strike on Iranian targets if Tehran refuses to meet US demands. Of course, we'll be keeping tabs on the situation between Iran and the United States as time moves forward. We now turn over to Lebanon, and the US State Department has ordered the evacuation of non-essential personnel and family members from the US Embassy in Beirut. A State Department official confirmed this decision, explaining that it was made after a recent security assessment of the region. The official says that the move is a temporary precautionary measure intended to ensure the safety of staff while still allowing the embassy to operate and provide assistance to US citizens. Core staff remains in place and the embassy will continue its work with a reduced footprint. This decision reflects the continuing challenges in the region, with the US remaining vigilant about the safety of its personnel. More breaking news coming out of West Asia coming up next. 4 Syrian security personnel have been killed in an Islamic State attack. This comes as one security officer was killed and another one was wounded in an Islamic State attack just last week in eastern Syria. The latest incident marks the 5th attack claimed by IS against Syrian government forces following an assault in the Sawida desert in southern Syria in May of last year, and 2 attacks on security personnel in Aleppo and Idlib in December. We now turn from the Middle East to the United States once again, where a judge has permanently blocked the public release of a special counsel report linked to the classified documents case against President Donald Trump. The judge said making the report public could cause irreparable harm and serve no legitimate purpose after the case was dismissed. The report was prepared by special counsel Jack Smith and related to allegations that Trump improperly retained classified materials after leaving office. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and has sought to prevent the documents' release, arguing it would be politically motivated. The ruling marks a final legal end to a high-profile case and ensures the report will remain sealed. Ross Feingold joins us now, a political analyst, joining us live from Taipei once again. Ross, the significance of this ongoing saga, what do you make of it?
It'll probably be something that angers Democrat members of Congress and the liberal media and pundits on liberal media. But there's nothing they could do about it at this point. The administration, led by President Trump, took the view that this information should not be made public, and the judge agreed with the Justice Department in this case and with President Trump's private lawyers as well. And as the judge said in her ruling, she couldn't find an analogous case where under these circumstances such a report had been released. And typically in the United States, when people are not charged, the information compiled during the course of an investigation is not released. Now, in this case, President Trump and others were charged, but then the charges were withdrawn subsequent to the election. So again, the judge was saying, I've never seen an identical situation, considering her finding that the special prosecutor was illegally or unconstitutionally appointed to his office. So it was kind of easy for her to reach that conclusion. But of course, it's not going to mollify the critics. They're going to say that she's biased because she was appointed by President Trump. And the only thing that might happen is maybe in the future, if there's a Democrat president, he or she will take a different view and be supportive of releasing the documents. Of course, President Trump, even out of office, he would continue to fight that in the future.
Ross Feingold, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us here on the broadcast. Great pleasure to talk to you as always. We turn now over to Europe once again, where Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban accused Ukraine of open political blackmail, saying Kyiv was deliberately blocking supplies of Russian oil through the Druzhba Pipeline. Shipments of Russian oil to Hungary and Slovakia via Druzhba have been severed since January the 27th, when Kyiv said a Russian drone hit the pipeline equipment in Ukraine. Slovakia and Hungary say Ukraine is to blame for the prolonged outrage. Speaking at the opening of the Hungarian parliament, Orban said his government had found no technical obstacles to resuming oil flows through the pipeline and said it was up to Ukraine whether to resume flows or not. Let's take a listen into the statements.
Arról is tájékoztatnom kell az országgyűlést, hogy hazánk történetében példátlan módon keleti szomszédunk, a háborúban álló Ukrajna január 27-től kezdődően blokkolja az olajszállításokat a barátság kőolajvezetéken. Jelentem a tisztelt háznak, hogy a kormány megvizsgálta a helyzetet, és megállapította, hogy a szállítások újraindításának nincs technikai akadálya. Ukrajna döntésén múlik, újra indítja-e a vezeték működését, vagy sem. Egyre világosabb, hogy nyílt politikai zsarolásról van szó.
Hungary looked set to block a new round of EU sanctions on Russia over the pipeline dispute, and Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said he would ask his country's energy grid to cut electricity supplies to Ukraine unless the pipeline was restarted. Meanwhile, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has stated that the actions of Hungarian government are acts of political sabotage that undermine helping Ukraine. Mark Sutherland joins us once again. Mark, this renewed accusations from Viktor Orban saying that Ukraine is responsible for open political blackmail. We've of course seen both Hungary and Slovakia both vote against the 20th round of sanctions against Moscow. What are your thoughts on this, especially due to the open support of the rest of the 27-member bloc?
Well, we've got a number of things to put in mind here. First of all, the Hungary refuses to go along with the European mass immigration policy, so they pay fines for that. They also, Orban has a relationship with Russia, is concerned about that with relationship with Russia, e.g. wants to keep lines of communication open as well, and also is conscious, as you've just said, of where they get their energy from. And then if the EU want to then come down on Viktor Orban, come down on Hungary, then they will then seek to do that, whether that's actually indirectly saying, well, we will attack them via energy or slow this down. These are all the realities, and if people turn around and push back at me, that's up to them. But the fact is that we then go to how the European Union then conducts itself, as I say, in regard to immigration, in regard to how certain elections are held. And people will say, why is that relevant, Mark? Well, it's looking at the whole context of Hungary as a country and the relationships, and also the personal history of Viktor Orban as well, who in the past under the Soviet Union regime has actually been arrested. So there is a long history here, personally and as a country, that has to be borne in mind, but it's also borne in mind in regard to growing its economy and where its energy then comes from. You and I haven't got 6-10 hours today to then have an update in regard to Russia, the Ukraine war, and again why. You and I have discussed this many months, but also in regard to Poland, in regard to Tusk, looking at him. I would describe him as a fairly sort of elitist individual, but also who wants to be at the centre of European politics and diktat, even though Poland is very concerned about its border with Russia and making sure that it that it has and wants military assets along there. So there is a lot playing out here, and my advice is we have to look at the individuals personally, look at their history, and then look at recent history as countries. Thomas.
Mark Sutherland, thank you so much for taking the time. As always, it's a great pleasure. We now turn over to North America. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has ruled out any participation by US troops in the operation that led to the death of drug lord Nimiso El Mencho Oseguera. She said there was no direct involvement, but confirmed extensive intelligence sharing between the two countries. Security Secretary Omar Garcia Harfuch says at least 25 National Guard members were killed by the Jalisco New Generation cartel following the operation. He added that a prison guard, a state prosecutor's office official, and 30 cartel members also died in the unrest. Oseguera was wounded in a clash with soldiers in Jalisco state and died while being flown to Mexico City. Let's take a listen into the statements.
Todas las operaciones se realizan por las fuerzas federales. No hay participación en la operación de fuerzas de Estados Unidos. Lo que hay es mucho intercambio de información, como lo hemos dicho aquí varias veces.
En Jalisco se registraron 6 agresiones, donde lamentablemente perdieron la vida 25 elementos de la Guardia Nacional, un custodio y uno de la Fiscalía General del Estado. En estos hechos, a manos de estos cobardes delincuentes, perdió la vida una mujer. Se contabilizaron 30 personas de la delincuencia organizada, 30 delincuentes que perdieron la vida también en estos ataques.
But that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.